Hi everybody, Steve Peha here. I want to talk a little bit today about revising revision. I'm working on a book on this, as many of you know. This is a narration of a slide deck that we went through, if you were with me, about a month or so ago at the Right to Learn conference in Missouri. We had a great crowd, and I really appreciated getting to know every one of you. And thank you for the 350 emails you sent my way. I hope I answered every one. This is another chance for us to keep in touch and to talk about some of the challenges of revision. This workshop is called Revising Revision for a very simple reason. I have discovered over the last few years or so that I had been thinking about revision in a certain way for my whole life. My life as a kid, my life as a professional writer, my life working with kids in classrooms. And the way I was thinking about revising really compromised the results I was getting. For a long time, I didn't get really good results, or at least not the kind of results that I thought I should get, not the kind of results I was getting with pre-writing or editing or drafting or all other parts of the writing process. Revision was kind of a mystery to me in many ways. But then I started thinking about it a little differently, and what I ended up revising was my opinion about revision. And I did it by sort of reframing some of the things that make it difficult into things that make it workable. So that's what this talk is about. So I think we can all agree that revision is hard. Certainly hard for me as a professional writer. It's hard for me as a non-professional writer. I get tangled up revising emails and Facebook posts. It's certainly very hard for kids, and the younger they are, the harder time they seem to have about it. This guy certainly looks like he thinks revision is pretty hard. And this was the belief I carried with me for decades. Revision is hard. It's what I believed. And so I thought it would be hard for kids, and sure enough, every time I taught it, it was. And that just reinforced the belief that revision was hard. And I really stopped teaching it as aggressively as I could because I just thought a lot of kids couldn't do it, and I didn't want to go through all the pain and agony of making them. It just wasn't working as a way of thinking about revision. So here's a change that perked up my spirits. Rather than thinking that revision was hard, I started thinking that revision is normal. And this occurred to me while I was writing my book about a year, over the last year and a half, Be a Better Writer, book for kids. And of course I revised that a tremendous amount. I think I revised the chapter. I completely rewrote the first chapter 5 times. The book was probably revised 3 or 4 times, some parts of it more than that. Why? Because revision was just a normal thing. I was doing a book. It's a fairly complicated topic. Writing is not easy. I'm trying to explain it in a way that 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids can understand without a teacher or a parent around. Revising was the normal thing that I would do. Probably about 90% of my time was spent revising that book. And then it occurred to me that revising was just a normal part of all the writing I did. I revised emails, I revised Facebook posts, I revised tweets. I have to revise tweets a lot because I'm not very good at writing in 144 characters. But if I started to think that revision is normal, then I thought, why can't I introduce it to kids that way? Why can't I introduce revision as just a normal part of writing, even to kindergartners or ESL kids? if I treat writing as normal, then kids might treat it as normal too. And sure enough, that's been the case as I've started to work with this idea. Revision is hard, is true, but revision is normal is also true. All serious writers revise, and even many of us who aren't writing seriously revise too. So it's just a normal part of writing. Here's another big idea that held me up. It was the notion that revision was a skill. Certainly it is a skill, and one has to be very skilled to do it well. But in holding on to this idea, I realized I was catching myself and students in a catch-22. That is, I would work with a group of kids, didn't matter what age, and I would notice that they weren't very skilled. And I would conclude from that they couldn't revise, because revising is a very specific skill. And it recently dawned on me that one of the reasons they couldn't revise is that they never got a chance to practice it. So how can you develop a skill if you don't practice it? So holding on to this notion, as I had for many years, that reading is a skill, was completely made teaching revision impossible. And it made being successful with revision, even when I taught it, highly unlikely, because I kept seeing it as a skill and not as what it really is. Revision is a habit. It's truly a habit. I'm not always very skillful with revision. In fact, I'm not skillful most of the time I revise. I revise and revise and revise, and sort of by intuition eventually arrive at something that I think is really good. But it's really just a habit for me. If I write almost anything, I'll end up revising it, and if it's more than an email, or if it's an article or part of a book or something, I'll probably revise it 5-10 times. It's just a habit. And the interesting thing about the habit for me is that I'm kind of addicted to it. Even things I wrote years ago, I'll take out again and revise them. I just want to do it. I want to make the writing better. I want to make it clearer. And it's just become a habit of mine to revise almost anything I see. So why can't I tell the kids that? It's just a habit. Revision is normal. It's what we do when we write, and it's just a habit to get better at. Just try it. Try it today, try it tomorrow, try it the next day. I'll teach you a couple of things. We'll do it together. I'll teach you a few specific strategies here and there. And as long as it's a habit for us, as long as we do it regularly, and we know that the key is just to make it part of what we do and how we do it, then we all should get better at it. In fact, as I've worked on this with kids, I've found that they get a lot better at it. I think for two reasons. One, they're doing it a lot. And two, thinking about revision as something that's just a habit is a lot easier and less weighty than thinking about revision as something that requires skill. So it's not that revision doesn't require skill, or that people who revise well aren't skilled. It's just that looking at revision as a habit makes it more workable, both for me as a teacher and for kids as writers. Here's another one. Revision takes talent. Of course revision takes talent, but that's not what a lot of the less talented folks like us want to hear. It's certainly not what kids want to hear. A better thing is that revision takes effort. It's no less true, but it's much more workable from a teaching and learning point of view. It takes me a lot of effort to teach revision, and I know it takes kids a lot of effort to be successful with revision. So why don't we focus on the effort instead of always worrying about the result? Everybody can work hard around revision. I can put in the effort. I can ask the kids to put in the effort. Remember that if they think it's normal and it becomes a habit for them, then putting a little extra effort into it won't be hard at all. That little bit of extra effort will make the difference for all of us. Revision is a problem. When I was in college, that's when I really got used to the idea that revision was a huge problem. Many of my professors in my English degree literally forced us through a revision pass, which I'm now glad of, but they would collect first drafts, or whatever we thought was our best shot. About halfway through the assignment, they would make some comments or visit with us in their office, and then we would have some problems to solve, because good professors always bring up questions and things that need to be clarified, and I began to see these as sets of problems I needed to solve in order to turn the paper back in. There's nothing really wrong with looking at revision that way. It is problematic, but if I think of it as a problem when I'm teaching, then I think I'm giving kids problems, and I don't want to do that. If I'm a kid and I think that revision is a problem, I'm not going to want to do it at all. In fact, I'm going to do everything I can to shy away from it, because who wants problems? Writing is enough of a problem at all for many kids. So I think something more workful is revision is an opportunity. It's not just a problem, but it's an opportunity to get better at writing and to create a better piece. That's what my professors were trying to tell me, I think. I think what they were saying is, hey, here's an opportunity to turn your piece in a little earlier and get the answers, basically. This is an opportunity for you to become a better writer and to produce better work. Now, of course, that's exactly how I think of revision. Revision is an opportunity, and I often ask people for more time or another opportunity to revise something further, because I know there's always a possibility that I can make my writing better. That's exactly what I want kids to think. Here's another one. Revision is time-consuming, and there's no doubt about that. It takes a long time to revise. You just heard me say that probably 90% of my time on Might Be a Better Writer book was spent revising. And, as I sort of comb through all the books I have on writing and talk to professional writers, on large projects, about 90% of the time we spend is on revising. So it's time-consuming. It is. But if I go in with that attitude, again, in a classroom where we never seem to have enough time for even basic things, I'm probably never going to teach revision, because I'm just going to be worried it takes up too much time. And I know as a kid, I would work so hard to turn a paper into my 9th grade English teacher, and then have to revise it because I got something completely wrong. Oftentimes I got something out of sequence, or I just drifted off topic. And then I've got 500, 800 words or whatever I have, and it really all has to be fixed. And that is time consuming. So rather than that, I think it's better to think of revision as time well spent. And I'll tell you a very simple reason that I've come to about this. It's become very clear to me that revision is the most valuable time we can spend with kids if what we want is for them to become better writers. Revision is the most valuable time we can spend, for a very simple reason. Revision is the time kids spend making their writing better. And anytime they make a piece of writing better, they've learned how to become a better writer. So this struck me so like a bolt of lightning one day. And ever since then, I've really thought a lot about it, and I've changed my teaching quite a bit to not to de-emphasize all the other parts of the writing process, but to lengthen the time we spend revising and the different things we do during revising and the amount of time we spend on revising, because that's the time we spend where we all become better writers. Now, this is the hard one for kids. We're done with revision when we're done with revision. And again, that's just true, but it's not very workable for school, not even really very workable for me or anybody who wants to finish anything, because you can revise something endlessly. I know I can. I do it all the time. It's not one of my best traits as a person or as a writer. So a different way to think about this is just a little trick here. There's a little curveball I'm going to throw. We're done with revision when we're done. this doesn't mean that we just give up and quit, but there's a way to look at being done. And we talked about it a lot in the previous deck about Writer's Workshop and helping kids finish more work. And I'm going to take you through a lot of the same things in this deck that are in that deck. But I'm going to talk about them less in the context of Writer's Workshop and more strictly in the context of revision. So, sure, we're done with revision when we're done with revision. But really, we're done with revision when we're done. And the key to knowing when we're done is to look at this guy. This is Sam Stern. He has many books out called Cooking with Sam Stern. He's a high school kid, might be a little older now. And he knows how to cook. And one of the things that great cooks know is when something's done. And I'm going to suggest that we all start using something that I call a definition of done. I first came upon this in my work in the software industry. I was working on a large Gates Foundation software project, and when you're on a big project, there are hundreds of people working, doing literally thousands of tasks. Excuse me. And it's very important to know even when the tiniest tasks are done. And so we created a team-wide definition of done. And there were 7 or 8 things that an engineer had to prove to a product owner. I was a product owner. I was overseeing the features of the product and coordinating with the Gates Foundation folks. But I was the intersection, or the person who sat between the client, the Gates folks, and our engineering team. So I would go to my teams and we would go through definition of done. There were about 8 things I needed to ask an engineer to show me to make sure that that I could pronounce their work done. The interesting thing about that is that I'm not very technical. I understand a lot about technology, but I don't understand how to write Java code. And so I couldn't really tell for sure if the guys were honestly being done or not. But with the definition of done, even somebody like me who didn't know when a piece of code was finished could use the definition sort of as a checklist to walk through things with my engineers. And it became a real important part of my work. And it was a place not of conflict, but a place of cooperation. And that was really the neatest thing about it. We started cooperating, them explaining to me why certain things were done a certain way, and me explaining to them the things I didn't understand about whether a certain part of the definition was really completed. So I'm going to suggest that we use a definition of done. And we talked about this in the deck on Writer's Workshop, and I'll tell you honestly why I put it in this deck. When we were doing our workshop on Writer's Workshop at the Write to Learn conference, I asked all of you to send me a continuous stream of email questions. Anytime you had a question, I just said, type it up to me on your phone and zip it off to my inbox. I think from that workshop, we had almost 200 people in the audience that day, and I got over 600 emails from you. And it was great. But what I learned more than anything was that this set of slides coming up about the definition of done was the most popular thing in the Writer's Workshop and the one thing you had the most questions about. So for this revision workshop, which I did on the next day, I just thought I'd put these slides in and add it to this part of the workshop. And I think it made a big difference because, again, people in that workshop, you all told me that this was probably the most valuable part of it. So definition of done in writing, is something I've had literally for 20 years, but I never really used it this way until just a little while ago. It's made a really big difference, and I'm starting to organize more and more of my teaching around this particular one thing. So after reading the beginning, readers should have a sense of what the piece is about. So when I'm thinking about revising for that sense of what a piece is about, I'm thinking about a title, I'm thinking about leads, I'm thinking about, if not saying exactly what the piece is about, as I might in an informational piece, persuasive piece, or argumentative piece of research writing, I'm certainly going to give it a hint. And what I'm looking for in the hint about what something's about is a particular detail. So often I'll use something called the idea detail strategy with kids to revise their beginnings so that it at least offers the audience a hint of what the piece is about. And that's the first part that I look for after reading the beginning. After reading the beginning, do readers want to read more? Now, that's not something that a writer can answer very well. And it's oftentimes not something that I can answer very well. So the strategy that we go to here is the obvious one. It's sharing the beginning of the piece, and I mean just the beginning, with the other writers in the classroom. And then I just usually stop the writer right after 50 words or 100 words or whatever we kind of think the beginning is. And I ask the kids if they want to read more. And, you know, they might go, yeah, no, whatever. But that's not really the useful information that I want. I want the kids in the audience to say why they want to read more, why they don't, and if they don't, what kind of information would make them want to read more. So out of this comes a strategy that's hardly even a strategy. I just call it questions and answers. The idea is that we set up a sharing situation about something really specific, and we ask the kids in the audience to pose equally specific questions back to the writer. We copy those down, or sometimes I have a kid in the audience just do the copying for the writer. The writer tries to answer them during the sharing, and every time the writer has a good answer, I just say, go write that down. It's almost like that Tom Sawyer trick of getting all the kids to paint the fence for him. Readers are really the best advisors in terms of revision. So making sure readers want to read more is a matter of asking your readers, listening to the questions they have, and then doing your best to answer them. Now, after reading the beginning, the third thing we're looking for is that readers think the piece will be worth reading. And this is sort of solved two ways. One is exactly to the same way as the previous item. We need the audience to tell us what they think they'll get out of it, why they feel it might be worth reading. But there's also something a writer can be almost sure of. Especially when we're writing an expository piece, a persuasive piece, perhaps an argumentative piece too, or a more formal paper with a thesis. If I've come up with a statement in the beginning that I think really does represent what the piece is about, and I think it's an important thing to say, then I really should work to continue my piece and support it, because I think it will be worth reading. Revision isn't all about what your audience thinks. It's a lot. It's mostly about what your audience thinks. But there are some things, like the worth of a piece, that I think the writer needs to at least be on equal value with. There are just some things that need to be written, even if other people don't think so. So looking at the middle now, and I think this is where obviously most of the time and challenge comes in, but there's three parts of the definition I've done here that make things a lot easier. So after reading the middle, readers have enough details to understand the one most important thing you want them to know. One most important thing is just my way of using regular language to talk about main idea. Main idea is a pretty slippery topic for both kids and teachers and every adult I've met in the world, whether they taught or not. We just use main idea to mean a lot of different things, and I'm only talking about one specific thing. I want to be able to know, after I've read the middle, what the one most important thing is that the writer wanted me to know. I want that to be at least a complete sentence, maybe more than one sentence, but I really, really, really want to know that. I don't mind having to work for it. I don't mind having to infer it, but I'm pretty much not going to feel very happy with the middle and all the time I've spent reading it if I can't figure out what the piece is really about. What's the writer really trying to tell me? The key word here is details. It's usually the set of details that add up to support the one most important thing the writer wants a reader to know. And again, this helps me shape the revision strategies that we use with kids. Again, we use the question and answer approach, but I don't have kids ask questions about adding tons of new material. What I want them to do in this particular case is to ask questions to clarify things that are already there. I can use a strategy called idea details. I can use a strategy called tell show. I can use draw label caption, chaining, all kinds of different strategies that I can show you about to work on this detail component. As a general rule of thumb, the more important a part of a piece is, the more details it requires, for two reasons. One, it's important, so there's a lot hanging on whether or not we get it across to our audience. And two, because it's important and there's a lot hanging on it, it requires a lot of support usually, especially if what we're talking about is something our readers may not be familiar with or something our readers may not believe. Another one after reading the middle here is readers should have enough information to answer all their important questions. Not all their questions, not every single question, but all their important questions. And I have to talk with the kids a lot about what an important question is. And the way I've had the most success with it is to help them see it two ways. From the author's point of view, as someone who's trying to say one important thing, and from their point of view as readers who are trying to understand one important thing. The questions that are the most important are the questions that help us answer things related to that one most important thing. Now, it doesn't mean we can't come up with questions about other things. We may have a detail or two that goes to support the main idea, and we may need some questions answered about that. I often find that details come in chains of logic. Detail 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and therefore the main idea or thesis. And so what we're doing sometimes as readers is helping writers make sure all the links in that chain are as tight as they need to be. And that's what having enough information means, and that's what important questions means. They're questions that have to do with the chain of reasoning, the sequence of logical statements in an informational piece, or the chain of events, the sequence of events in a narrative piece. That's very important for us to keep the thread of. Last here in the middle, readers should think that the writer included the right amount of information. That's a really hard one for all of us. And again, the only way to really check it off is with an audience. Do I have too much or too little in terms of detail? But it's really important. Getting a handle on the right amount of detail is one of the hardest things to do. But it's really one of the most important, especially these days where people don't really want to spend any more time reading something than they have to. They want the right amount of information, not so little that they're confused, and not so much that they really are bored. So we talk to kids a lot about how to find the right amount. Again, I try to paint for them kind of a picture here. It's just a metaphor that the main idea is in some sense a destination. And you can preview that early, or you can just wait till you get there. It doesn't matter. And there's a path that we follow along the way. And that path has to do with the important information that's most relevant to that main idea. And so sometimes what I'll do when I'm talking to kids about questions and details is saying, is that on the path? Does that information help us move from one place on the path to another place on the path? Or does it wander off the path a little bit? Maybe it starts a whole new path. If it starts a new path, maybe we should just save that for a new piece. So finding the right information is kind of like driving from place to place in the most efficient way. Saves us time, saves us resources, and kind of helps the people on the other end too, so they don't have to wait all day for us to get someplace. Here's the end, and I think the beginning and the middle are challenging enough, but most of us have struggled lifelong, all our lives, with good endings. And I pretty sure I know where that comes from. I know where it came from me. It came from school and being taught that somehow the ending had to summarize the beginning or something, or the whole piece or something like that. And that never worked out well for me. If I felt that I had a good beginning, how could I do better at the ending? If anything I could come up to add at the ending about the beginning, I probably should have just added the beginning. And summarizing it and stating the beginning again, especially in the short pieces we write in school, just seemed silly. It seemed redundant and a waste of my time and a waste of the reader's time. And that's just because I didn't understand the function of an ending in a piece of writing. I was being taught about form. The form of a standard, 5-paragraph essay is tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. It's a 3-part structure. It's repetitive, it's boring, doesn't really exist in the world, but it's something that is almost certainly the most widely taught form of writing in our society. And unfortunately, it has some negative consequences, one of which is, while kids may understand the formal qualities of an ending, they don't understand the function of an ending. So I like to teach writing functionally. I like to teach kids what things do in writing more than I like to teach them what writing is supposed to look like or what it's supposed to have. So there are 3 things that piece of writing is supposed to do in the ending. One of them is the reader should understand why the piece was written. We have this sort of confusing traditional way of explaining kids the modes of writing, and we say that the purpose of narrative writing is to tell a story. We say that the purpose of expository writing is to inform. We say that the purpose of persuasive writing is to persuade, and we don't say anything about the purpose of argumentative writing because it really isn't to argue, and we never say that to kids. So we just don't tell them that the purpose of argumentative writing in the old model would be exactly the same as the purpose of persuasive writing. I just want to persuade you about something by making a more formal evidence-based argument. None of these things are helpful. Knowing that I'm supposed to tell a story doesn't help me come up with an ending for it. Knowing that I'm supposed to inform or persuade doesn't help me write a good ending for an informative or persuasive piece. But I do always have a reason why I'm writing the piece. And it usually comes down to one or more of the following 3 things. Writers write pieces of all kinds so that they can make people think something when they're done, make people do something when they're done, make people feel something when they're done. So I look at the purpose of a piece in terms of think, do, feel. And we'll look at some endings in just a minute or two, and you'll see that in some ways they all relate to a thought we want to leave our readers with at the end, something we'd like them to do, a call to action, this is sometimes called. Or maybe it's just a feeling. Maybe we just want to leave people with a strong emotional experience. And that's the purpose. That's why we write. To make people think things, to make people do things, to make people feel things. Those are the real reasons we write. Now, readers need to feel that the piece is finished and that it gives them something to think about. So this is an emphasis on that. Think about it after it's over. And in the other deck, when I was talking about it, I use this example all the time of walking out of a movie theater and finding yourself still talking about the ending, good or bad. We often talk about the ending. It's high stakes. The ending is high stakes. It can turn a bad movie into a pretty good experience, and it can certainly ruin a great movie, turn into a bad experience, or at least a disappointing one. So readers need to get to the end, and they need to have this sense like, oh, okay, I'm done. That ends. That makes sense. That's logical. It feels finished. But I've got to take away something. And a professor of mine called it the so what. He said, I just read your paper. I know that Hemingway's short stories were precursors to his first novels, and that you can find all kinds of parallels in any short story to any one of his novels. So what? he would ask. Sometimes he would just write it, so what? And at first, a lot of us thought he was kind of being mean. He wasn't. What he was saying is, he's saying, we all know these things. This is what you should write. This is what we should do if we're going to talk about the connection between a writer's early writing and his late writing. We should talk about the connection. But what's important about that? What matters about that? What have you discovered about that that somebody else maybe doesn't know? He said even something that I don't know. He's teaching the same novels for years, and he doesn't really want to hear the same tired stuff. So he wants to feel the piece is finished, but then he wants to get something new to think about. And what he wants to think about is, so what? Why did you bother telling me all this stuff about a piece? If it wasn't that important, if you didn't want me to go, oh, I see what. So that's a hard thing to get across to kids, but sometimes it's easy. When I talk about fairy tales and fables, when I talk about stories that are meant to make a point, sometimes we call it the lesson or the moral of the story, because that is the so what. The kids can see that all the things that lead up to it could be removed, and there's details that could be replaced by other details, and they wouldn't really make much of a difference. But what makes the story enduring is that it has a so what feeling about it. Think about this. The last one here, readers have to feel they'd had a valuable experience reading your work. Informational writing, I think the value for most people is coming away with valuable information. That means knowing your audience and what they value in terms of the topic that you're working with. In other forms of writing, the value is different. And to teach kids about this, I have to connect it up a lot with their reading. And we talk about some of the bigger books they've read. And the Harry Potter ones are easiest. Certainly it's ones kids know really well, and they're long. And I'll often say, well, what was the value in that experience? You just read 900 pages. What was valuable about it? And I'm going to try it again to get this connected back up from their reading. What does J.K. Rowling want you to think? Is there a lesson here? Is there something to take away? And of course there is. All kinds of things to take away from every one of the Harry Potter books. There might be some value there. Does the author want you to do something? And that's a hard one for kids in fiction because they don't think that fiction is real. And fiction is often where writers go to make things as real as they possibly can. The story may be made up, but the meaning is real. And sometimes that meaning is about doing things. One of the big things that comes across in every single Harry Potter book is that what we should do is help our friends. That's what we should do. If we're on this world for any reason at all, we might as well start with being here to help our friends and loved ones, and really all people who need help. And it's a nice way that I've come to think about a lot of fiction, in particular series fiction, where there's a kind of a heroic quality to it. What should we do? We should help. And I often have kids evaluate the endings of books based on the degree to which they meet that standard. I'm not saying it's a standard that every author has to live up to, or that every book has to be about thinking about solving a problem or helping somebody. I'm just saying it's an interesting yardstick to put up. It's one of the reasons why I will say that I enjoy the Harry Potter books, but that I thought the first book in Lois Lowry's series, The Giver, where, well, it's a spoiler, but you probably all know The Giver anyway, when Jonas runs off at the end and leaves the community. I think that's a bad ending, and I think it's a bad message. Jonas essentially condemns his civilization and his community to chaos by leaving. And he's doing it, of course, ironically, to help a small baby. So one could say that he is helping, he is Lois Lowry is putting across that message of saving those who are not as strong as we are. But I think there's a larger message in that book about what we owe to our society, our parents, our community. And I think Jonas transgresses that pretty seriously relative to his new responsibility as the receiver in this particular story. So this notion of ending, the purpose of the piece, why the piece was written, something to think about, valuable experience, it's all going to come down to those same three things. What do you want readers to think? What do you want them to do? What do you want them to feel? And the best endings have bits and pieces of all three of those combined together. So again, as a revision opportunity, endings are really ripe. I can work with kids on the last paragraph or two of something 3 or 4 or 5 times in a row really fast, because they may just be changing one line or one word or 2 sentences. And then we can look at it again and see if we're meeting all the criteria. And I've seen kids hone their endings 10, 15, 20 times in just 1 or 2 class periods and really come up with something that is just absolutely strikingly beautiful and sharp and diamond-like in the way that it comes across so clear and hard and shiny. And so if there's a place to work and a time to work on really good revision, it's to put it in on the ending. Endings are hard, and often what we can do is revise them little by little by little until they get better and better and better. So I'm going to go through probably pretty much the same set of lessons that we went to on the previous deck, but again, I'm going to go through them in a different way. And the motto here is the same one. It's Yogi Berra's famous phrase, you can observe a lot just by watching. And I asked myself, he has many famous yogi-isms that we've all come to know and love. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. That's one of my favorites. It isn't over till it's over. It's one of his. Gosh, he has so many. Look him up on Wikipedia and find 20 or 30 of these statements. I always give them out to kids, and we talk about what language means when it's confusing, because language still means quite a lot, and sometimes these little sort of deja vu, it's deja vu all over again. That was another one of his. But Yogi Berra was a smart guy, and he meant certain things when he said to these phrases. This one has particular meaning because he was a catcher, which means he spent most of his life watching the baseball game from the best seat in the house, right behind the batter, right in front of the umpire. And he's a very observant man. And I think what he meant to say is that if you're just watching, if you just spend enough time watching, you can actually come up with keen observations. If we wanted to sort of tease out the meaning of this, we might rewrite it. You can make a lot of interesting observations if you just spend a lot of time watching. But that's not nearly as poetic or funny as you can observe a lot just by watching. But it's true, and it's especially true of teaching. So I'm going to go through some things pretty fast here, but you can observe a lot just by watching. So here's the typical unusual T-chart. I use a lot for topic selection. Put typical things in your life on the left side. Put unusual things about your life on the right side. This is mine. I love to read, watch football with my wife. Pro football more than college, but college football too. If her team, University of North Carolina, is playing, or if my team, the Washington Huskies, are playing. It is very typical for me to visit schools. Writing is very typical. Going out to lunch is typical. Facebooking, typical. Taking naps. Oh, do I love naps. And visiting my mom. My mom lives in Seattle, where she raised us, and her health is, it's not perfect now. And we would always go once or twice a year at least to see my mom and family. But now I think we're going to go 4, 5, 6 times a year. Make sure my mom's okay. And it's going to become a more typical part of my life. And the reason I took the time to tell you about that is that sometimes we don't think much of these topic selection exercises. But if you'll notice on the typical side here, I've done all of these things so many times. I probably have 50 stories to tell you about each one. And so these typical topics are great because kids can dig into them and find the best stories and the best persuasive. And these ones on the typical side can be used for descriptive writing, narrative writing, fiction, expository, persuasive, argumentative. All the kinds of writing we want kids to do can come right off the typical side. And I really like kids to have a really strong connection to their topics. On the unusual side here, we usually have things that have only happened once or so in our life, special things, unusual experiences. Most of us tend to come up with, funny things that happen. I swallowed a pin when I was a baby. Broke my foot letting the dogs outside for the night. Got married in a bowling alley. That's true. My wife and I got married the year before Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. We felt very fortunate to be in New Orleans then. We feel very close to the city. We went back to see it. Took our second anniversary just about 9 months after Katrina. Spent some time in the city, and people were sure glad to see us there, and we felt good going, even though it wasn't the most romantic place at that time. We got married at the Rockin' Bowl, Mid-City Lanes, a famous Rockin' Bowl. It's a bowling alley and music club, and really fun. We got married on lanes 12 and 13. And we made bowling shirts, and on the back of the bowling shirts it says "No splits." So that was our promise to each other. We went to Paris on our honeymoon. We didn't go right away. We had to save up and wait for some friends we knew to live there and give us a place to stay with them. And we cashed in all the points we had and had nice accommodations, and our friends were very generous with us. And it is very unusual, I think, to work with Bill Gates. And I say sort of down there because I played a very small role in 3 events that Gates was the headline speaker. And I was part of a group that provided some live entertainment as the introductory music to Bill Gates coming on and giving a speech, which meant not so much during the speech because he didn't look at me or talk to me, but it meant a lot during rehearsals because he wanted to move the podium around a lot, and one time he asked the guys to move it literally on top of where my head was going to be. We were on a lowered platform, and Bill didn't know this, but the platform was going to be rising up as they introduced us to play, and he wanted the podium put on a certain place where I literally would have crushed me. So fortunately, we were able to explain that to Mr. Gates, and he kindly decided to move the podium back just a little bit. But it did mean that my head, I had to lean back to the back part of the rising stage to make sure that I didn't run into the podium, or that any of the equipment we were using didn't run into it either. So I did work for Bill Gates sort of once, and I got yelled at him once, sort of a badge of honor. Let's move on. So I've got to pick a topic, and I'm going to pick broke my foot letting the dogs outside for the night. It's a funny story, and it's kind of fresh in my mind. Just happened last year. So here's my pre-write. I'm using a strategy called action, feelings, setting. It's a really good strategy for any scene in the narrative. It's good for kicking anything off with a narrative that has a narrative feel to it. It's also great for prompting revision because I'm going to write some things in the action column about what happened, and you're going to see immediately that they trigger the need for more ideas, more explanation. The feelings column is so important for voice, and it's so important for connecting with readers. And kids don't often put enough feeling in their writing, and that's why their reading is boring. It's why their reading has no voice. I'm not saying that feelings are the only way to put voice in or to make writing exciting. That's not true. But it doesn't hurt. I really want to know about the emotions behind the piece. And again, this will trigger not only some material I can use, but it'll trigger a good category of revision things. And then there's setting. And sometimes the setting is not very important in our stories, but sometimes it is. I often tell kids that there's more to setting than just time and place, because most of our stories take place in more than one time and more than one place. So it's kind of silly, again, and look at the Harry Potter books and say, what's the setting of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone? I think that's book 1. What's the setting of Harry Potter book 1? I don't know. Some of it's at the Dursleys' house, some of it's at Hogwarts, some of it's in the forest, some of it's at Diagon Alley. I mean, some of it's at Hagrid's house. There's no one place or time. So this notion of setting as place and time isn't quite right. It's valuable in a sense that stories are told across a lot of time and many places, and so we can always say, what's the setting now, or what's the setting of the scene? But there's another way of looking at setting, and it's more closely tied with premise, or set up. And when I talk to kids about setting is, can you set up your story so that everything I read from a certain point, I have a context for. I can understand because you've set me up for it. Now that could mean set me up so that I know what's coming, or it could mean setting me up so that I don't know what's coming and I'm surprised at the end. But that's what I mean by setting. It's certainly time and place are important, but it's really setting up the story. So, here's the context you need to understand my story. I'm in my house, I'm in my bedroom. I go down the hallway, go down the stairs, the dogs are barking, really excited. They're always excited to go out one more time late at night. And that's the setting, that's the information you need. You can kind of tell that stairs might be involved here and that barking excited dogs might be involved here. So I'm kind of setting you up to get ready for what happened in my story. So I'll take a quick draft. Before I can do any revising with kids, I've got to get them to draft. But here's the thing. I thought that I used to have to get them to a complete full draft. Well, that might never happen. In fact, regularly, it often didn't happen at all. So one of the reasons I didn't teach revision very much is because I thought I had to wait until kids essentially finished a draft of the piece to go back over the whole thing. Well, that's way too late. Who wants to go back and revise something they've already written 1,000 words on? Why not look at the first 200 words or 50 words and see what might need to be revised there? So let me just read this now. Each night, right before bed, I have to let our dogs out. A few months ago, I fell on the stairs as they went by me and broke my foot. Ouch. I missed a stair and came crashing down on my right foot. For a moment, I felt lucky. No injuries, I thought. Then I remembered that cracking sound I'd heard as I went down. And that is exactly what happened. I heard this cracking sound, but I was really much more concerned for the moment of my back and my head. And when they weren't hurt, I thought, oh, I'm not hurt either. And then I remembered the crack. And as soon as I remembered the crack, my foot was in so much pain. A really interesting experience of how we can control or lose control of pain simply by where we place our attention. So obviously this piece needs more to it, but I also need to fix a couple things. I have a little confusion there about whether the dogs broke my foot or I broke my foot. Story certainly didn't have much to it at that point. So I do some more drafting, but am I drafting or am I revising? Clearly, some of the red, the orange in here is revision. And I thought about it this way over the last year or two. Why not tell kids that pretty much after they get a little bit written that they're revising? One, it's true. Two, it gets across the notion that revising is a habit. Three, it gets across the notion that revising is normal. Four, it removes most of the stigma about revising being hard or needing a lot of skill. It certainly gets the point across that revising is an opportunity. So this idea now that we have to write a whole piece before we take it to revision, I realize is another belief I used to hold. And you know what? I don't even hold it for myself. I don't even believe it for myself. I don't know why I put this belief on kids, because I revise all the time. I write a paragraph, I write a sentence, and I'll look at it and I'll go revise that. So I don't know where I got this idea. I really don't, because it doesn't have anything to do with the way I write or the way I think or anything I've ever heard from a writer. This whole first draft, the notion of a first draft, or sometimes teachers, we will call it a sloppy copy. I don't know where these things come from. Wherever they come from, put them back. They're not helpful. Call drafting, just writing stuff down. And when we're adding to something or writing something to go with something that exists already, just call it revising. There's 4 ways to revise. You can revise by changing things. You can revise by removing things. You can revise by moving things around. And you can revise by adding. And so what is more drafting but revision by adding? Each night, right before bed, I have to let our dogs Mookie and Marvin outside. They won't let me get to sleep if I don't. A few months ago, their excitement turned into a little problem. I I got up out of bed and headed for the stairs. One of them ran between my legs and knocked me off balance. I missed a stair. With all my weight, I came crashing down on my right foot. I tumbled down to the landing. For a moment, I felt lucky. No injuries, I thought. Then I remembered that cracking sound in my foot. So, that's not great yet. Probably won't ever get to be great. But this is what I model. And this is actually an example I did model in front of kids. So, I mean, everything you're seeing here is something I've taught. So let's move along now, and I'm going to go over some real standard revisions, the revisions that I think are most important, and the ones that I want to make sure all kids master. I really do want a level of mastery on these revisions. A good place to start, of course, is revising the beginning. And remember back with our definition of done, we talked about giving readers a hint of what it's about, making them feel like they want to read more, making them feel like it's going to be a valuable experience. And so let's look at all of these revisions in terms of the definition of done, because that's what I'm starting to do in my teaching. I'm starting to connect all my teaching with how do we get a good piece of writing done? I used to connect my teaching up with what lesson am I doing today, or what do I want kids to learn today? And that's nothing wrong with both of those. But looking at it as how do I want to make sure kids get something good done is the best way to make sure they get something good done. So I've been evaluating and communicating my teaching primarily through the definition of done, and we'll talk about it here. There's a question beginning. You can always start out with a question. It's the easiest form of beginning. And of course, very few readers can resist answering a question, so by default, it does make people want to read more. It helps if it's a better question rather than a worse one, but it fulfills that. Then begin with a sound. Crack. I heard the most terrible sound a person can hear, the sound of one's own breaking bones. That'll probably get somebody's attention and keep them reading. Most of us are curious about those kinds of things. Begin with the setting. It was a normal night like any other. I was in bed watching TV and relaxing when my dog, Mookie, put his big paw on my arm, which meant, in Mookie language, that he wanted to go outside one more time. So there's nothing wrong with the setting beginning. It's a normal beginning. It's very similar to the fairy tale beginning. Once upon a time, in a place far, far away, there lived a person who did X, Y, and Z. But I think you'll see, even though it's a quite legitimate beginning, that it's probably the least interesting of the five we have here. We can begin with action. Mookie and Marvin shot past me like bullets as I made my first steps down the stairs. The prevalence of action movies and action TV and cold open, the idea of the cold open, like on Saturday Night Live, just beginning right in the action is a great, great thing. Sometimes I tell kids it's the Shakespeare trick. They really like that. It's the idea of starting in the middle, or in the middle of the thing. Latin for that is in medias res. And I just tell kids, there's this fancy thing Shakespeare liked to do, and there's a big Latin name for it, but really it's just beginning right in the middle of the action. And it usually works. A really great way to begin, and it's really what I've tried to do now more and more in my own writing, is to begin with feelings, either something I feel or something that I think the audience wants to feel. I want to connect people emotionally with what I do, because that's the way to grab a hold of them in the strongest possible fashion and hold them with me the longest. So I'll begin with feelings. There's something very sad about tripping over your own 2 feet and falling down the stairs. Now, it's not really something that's supposed to make you feel sad. I mean sad in terms of ironic, or maybe sort of pathetic, or not very intelligent, whatever. Tripping over my own 2 feet and falling down the stairs. It's scary, it's dangerous, but you know what? It's really kind of sad. So there's a lot of different emotions packed in there. You could possibly feel some sadness for me, but probably you think a different feeling that might be a little more interesting and get you to wonder why I'm starting out that way. Why am I using, in a way, a kind of self-deprecating humor to get started with this piece? So what I've chosen here is to use different beginning strategies together to make what I call a combination lead, or to make a lead paragraph instead of a lead sentence. So I've used sound, I've used action, and I've ended this paragraph with a question. Crack! I knew I had just broken my foot. I didn't want to believe it, but the pain made a convincing argument. How, I wondered, had the simplest of my nighttime duties turned into a colossal disaster? I'm not going to win any Pulitzer Prizes, but if I got that from a kid, I'd be pretty happy. I wouldn't necessarily be happy because that's the most gripping beginning in the world. I think I'd be really happy because there's a lot of technique in there. Mostly that's what I want to see from kids. I want to see them mastering techniques. And then I want them to know the list of techniques they've mastered, because that becomes their repertoire for going on in life. And I've thought about this a lot. Kids have 13 years with us, K through 12. What if all they mastered were, say, 4 different writing techniques every year? 1 writing technique a quarter. No, sorry. Yes, 1 writing technique a quarter, 4 writing techniques a year, 1 writing technique every 9 weeks. Do you think we could teach kids how to write, how to start with a sound in 9 weeks? My point is that if all we did was teach kids 1 thing every 9 weeks about writing, a technique, I mean, not a punctuation thing or something like that, but a writing technique, they'd have a repertoire of 52 writing techniques when they left. And you know what's really interesting is that I spend time helping college kids with writing too. I also spend time helping adults. And you know what? Almost none of them have any techniques at all. So think about that. It's pretty shocking that one could spend 52 quarters in your life and not know a single writing technique. I think that tells us we need to change the focus of our writing teaching from forms and types of writing and traditional research papers and literary analysis and all these things. We need to teach kids techniques, because the same techniques work through almost all forms. So if we're talking about preparing kids for life when we teach, we really want to teach them how to do 2 things. We want to teach them that revising is really where the action is, and that techniques are the most important things they'll ever learn about writing, because they'll take techniques and they'll take their attitude with revision right out of high school. They'll need it in college, and they'll certainly need it in the world of work. Here are some endings. I teach endings the same way, just by giving kids different named strategies and examples. I probably have about 30 or 40 different beginnings I can give kids. Smaller number of endings, maybe about 20. Just like beginning with feelings hooks people, ending with feelings kind of gives people a great, oh, that was good. I got something out of it. I got an emotional experience out of it. Ending with a question is almost just as popular as ending with beginning with a question. Ending with a realization. That's often where we want kids to go. It's often how novels work. Certainly often how big books are when we read them, or movies when we see them. We get to the end and we have a big realization. My story is sort of a small realization, but it's a realization nonetheless. When I went to see the doctor the next day, I thought I had an unusual story to tell about how I broke my foot letting my dogs outside. And I really did think I had an unusual story of pets causing me to hurt myself. But the doctor wasn't impressed. Apparently many injuries like mine have something to do with pets. My story wasn't special at all. I'm trying here again to reach for that little bit of self-deprecation that I thought I might have started the piece with. It's probably too muted and too inconsequential to really be a great ending, but this is a reasonable example. End with something about the future. Future or forward-looking endings are great because by definition you leave the piece just like you leave the theater, and you have something to carry with you as you go to think about. So ending with something about the future is good. Mine again is fairly average. Looking ahead, I know one thing. I don't want to break this foot again. So I'm working out some new rules for the dogs and me when we're on the stairs together. The first rule will be, let's not be on the stairs together. That's not really working out too well so far, but I am holding onto the railing and I am letting the dogs get all the way up the stairs or all the way down the stairs. I'm not walking while they shoot past me anymore, so I guess I have learned my lesson. So again, I'm going to use two particular techniques for my ending, the feeling and the realization. I think often those two go well together, because it's often that the realization is triggered by a feeling. That's very much how things happen for us in our lives. It's very much how things happen for us in our brains. So it's very natural for readers to read this kind of an ending, and then very natural for writers to write it. Limping into the doctor's office the next morning, I felt strangely special. I had an odd story to tell about an unusual event. The orthopedist took one look at my foot and said, "Do you have dogs?" I told her I did. "More than half of these injuries involve pets," she said matter-of-factly. I guess I wasn't so special after all. I was just another clumsy pet owner with a swollen, throbbing foot. I'm using a combination lead here, as I said, feeling and realization. Now, for the mystery of revising for details. This is really going to happen a lot. It's going to happen so much that I've gotten to the point where I use this strategy a lot. It's easy, it never fails, and all I have to really do is identify a sentence or a phrase and just say, "Why don't you try the idea details on that phrase?" And then once kids know the idea details, it's a very easy strategy to learn, they know exactly what to do. We don't even have to talk about it anymore. So the idea here is one of the dogs knocked me off balance, and the details are they shot past me, one ran between my legs, other one was on the outside, didn't want to step on them, stepped on myself. You can see it's kind of a bullet list of phrases. Sometimes they're complete sentences, sometimes they're not. Kids will ask if they have to be complete sentences. They don't. However, their piece will probably have to be written in complete sentences, so I tell them if they've got a good sentence to complete here, they might as well do it, save a little time. The nice thing about the idea detail sentence is that it makes a perfect paragraph. So if I've got a sentence inside a story that really needs more detail, just take that sentence out and replace it with the paragraph I've created with idea details. As they shot past me in a mad dash, one of them ran between my legs while the other raced by on the outside. I didn't want to step on them, so I decided to step on myself. There are so many good things about this strategy. I don't really teach kids how to paragraph anymore. They learn just by using strategies that produce paragraphs automatically, and by me helping them notice how paragraphing works in the books they read. As it pertains to revision, there's a great thing here. If you have kids who are reluctant writers, you may get them to write 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 sentences at the most, and then they'll say they're done. What I do is I let kids do that, and I say, "Hey, great job. Let me show you this trick." And I'll take the 4 sentences and I'll use each one as the idea part of an idea details. And the kid will come up with like 4 little sentences more, or 5 sentences more, or whatever, on the detail side, and I'll say, "Write those up. Now you got 4 paragraphs at least, and then we can start getting somewhere." What I find with reluctant writers is they're not really reluctant to write, they're reluctant to write poorly. Once I show them with a few strategies that at least getting a draft going isn't very hard, they're not so reluctant anymore. Reluctance to do anything, really, think about anything you're reluctant to do. Reluctance to do anything is a matter of not knowing how to do it or being afraid of the outcome. And I think when it comes to writing, kids have both of those fears. So we have to take that fear away. And that's what giving kids a strategy like idea details does. Remember in the definition of done, the middle was all about making sure people had enough information. And as I said, that information usually comes in the form of details. So that's why I spend a lot of time revising for details. So probably the best revision I can ever teach kids is the famous one from Strunk and White, The Elements of Style. It's called Omit Unnecessary Words. So we're going to revise out here a number of words that are unnecessary, and what we'll do is we'll do a little better than Mr. Strunk and White did. They just said take the unnecessary words out, but they didn't tell us what kinds of words to look for, and that's why I never learned how to do it. So when I work with students on this, I tell them what kinds of words I want them to take out. We'll take a look at it here. I've just grayed them out a little bit there, or greened them out. You can see up in the first sentence that we've got a lot of verbs here. Crack, I knew, I had just broken my foot. 3 different verbs there. I just call that oververbing or double verbing, or in this case, triple verbing. And I only need 1 verb in a sentence, so I can say, crack, I broke my foot. Works just fine. It does change things from pluperfect past or whatever that was, some kind of past tense to a present tense, but I kind of like that. If you look down farther to the third sentence, how, I wondered, there's one of those middle parts. It's called a non-restrictive clause in this sense because it doesn't restrict what's on. It's not restricted to modifying either what's on either side. In fact, by definition, a non-restrictive clause doesn't need to be in a piece at all. So it's a great candidate to be removed. How, I wondered, had the simplest of my nighttime duties turned into a colossal disaster. I might as well just take out I wondered. How had the. I was trying to do 2 revisions. I have to take out the there. So repetitive. How had a simple nighttime duty turned into a disaster? Do I really need colossal? If something is a disaster, don't we already know it's kind of colossal? Is a colossal disaster really different than a disaster? If something is completely destroyed, is that really different than being destroyed? If something is unusually unique, is that any different than being unique? These are unnecessary modifiers. They could be adjectives or adverbs. In my case here, they're adjectives. And so I've got extra verbs I can take out. I've got these non-restrictive clauses, or these middle parts that don't make a difference. I call them middle parts that don't make a difference. And now I've got a third category of modifiers, in this case an adjective, but adverbs can be removed usually too, especially by finding a single verb that gets the sense of the verb plus the adverb. That's how we know it's a strong verb. Each night, right before bed. Why do I need right before bed? If I say before bed, doesn't that mean right before bed? I don't say 20 minutes before bed. So why do I need right before bed? That's another unnecessary adjective. I have to, let our. So you can see I've got another double verb sentence there. So here's a sentence in which I make 2 unnecessary types of things here. One is an adjective and the other is an extra verb. And the sentence reads just fine with both of those removed. Each night before bed, I let our dogs, Mookie and Marvin, outside. Now, it's obvious what this has to do with revision. These are tiny revisions that make the piece more compact. But think back to the definition of done. A lot of what's in the definition of done has to do with keeping and holding an audience's attention, giving them the information and only the information they need, and making sure they feel like the experience is worthwhile. All of those things are dramatically enhanced by removing unnecessary words. The other thing that I like to bring up to teachers, especially if we're having trouble with close reading, is that this is close reading. Is you have to read very, very closely. You have to take a sentence. You have to think about words you can take out. You have to compare the new sentence with the old sentence. You have to make sure it makes sense still. You have to make sure it makes sense with other things. You haven't taken out something you need later on. There's a lot of really close reading kids have to do. And that's what I like about this so much. Makes the writing better, makes kids better readers. And kids can do about 20 revisions really quickly. And I always give them credit. I say, that's a revision, that's a revision, that's a revision. Keep going. Here's the rest of my piece. Won't read it to you. You can take a look at it on the screen. Pause the video if you like. Again, it's just the kind of sort of middle-of-the-road modeling I do for kids. I don't feel the need when I model very often to write that well. It's often better if I write somewhere in the middle. Kids certainly love revising me, and I don't mind modeling being the subject of their requests. So it was 244 words when I had it originally, and I think with all that revision, I got it down to 198 words. And I think with this particular technique, you can not only make your piece a lot stronger, you can usually shorten it by 10 to 20%. Here, I think I almost made the 20% category. Look down here at the bottom. I'm talking about unusual adverbs here in the last paragraph. Living to the doctor's office next morning, I felt strangely special. What's wrong with just feeling special? I mean, I don't always feel special. It's kind of strange. I don't need strangely there. Had an odd story. That's, of course, an adjective. about an unusual event. That's an entire phrase I don't need. And we often find that a lot of prepositional phrases are unnecessary. But look down here a little farther. The doctor is talking to me. She says, "Do you love dogs?" I told her I did. And she says, "More than half of these injuries involve pets." And I say, "She said," matter-of-factly. But in fact, that's just commenting on how she said something. That's just modifying that. And I don't even need you to know she said it, because she's speaking right after me. So I can take rid of what is effectively almost an entire sentence there. She said, matter-of-fact, I can leave that out. So another good one, we often use multiple modifiers, multiple adjectives. You can look in the last sentence here. I guess I wasn't so special. Well, special and so special aren't really different. I wasn't so special at all. I was just another clumsy pet owner. Now, here's a neat trick. I often tell kids that when they have two sentences that follow together logically, this happened, so I was just, this happened, or just something like this. Whenever we have that pattern, you can often take out the subject of the sentence, I, and the verb, was, and just put a semicolon in where you had a period. And it makes things a little tighter and a little neater for your ending, especially. I guess I wasn't special after all. Just another clumsy pet owner with a throbbing foot. I didn't need swollen in there. I didn't need the multiple modifier. Just another clumsy pet owner with a swollen, throbbing foot. Might be good for emphasis. It might be good for rhythm, but it's certainly not necessary. I guess I wasn't special after all. Just another clumsy pet owner with a throbbing foot. I think that's probably a better ending. So let's be excited, like this kid. Yeah! I wanted to tell kids in the last couple of years that I'm not just making things up about a way of revising. All my different reframings of revision, I'm not just making those up. Those are true and they're real. And I'm teaching them a way of revising that is a method of revision. It's very intentional on my part. So I kind of gave it one of those names that makes it sound a little more important than it is. I call it strategic incremental revision. It's strategic. I want kids to use specific strategies, and it's up to me to teach them strategies. And it's incremental. The revisions are really, really small. The piece gets better by small increments. So that's what you've been looking at, and that's what this thing is called. And it involves a process. We have to read the text closely. Then we have to identify a small part to improve. That's really the key for getting kids to make just one little small part to improve. And then pick a strategy and give it a try. Say, oh, I've got this part I want to improve. What strategy do I know would fix that the best? Be conscious of the strategy. That's what helps kids learn it. Choose the best version. So I've looked at my problem, I've applied my strategy, I've given it a try. I now have two versions of the same text, one that was original and one that's revised. I have to choose the best version. Just because I revised something doesn't mean I made it better. I can just as easily make it worse. So I have to read and compare again to make sure that I've got the best version in front of me. And then I just say, repeat until done. And done here means meeting the definition of done. So we repeat this process of reading text closely, identifying a small part to improve, picking a strategy, giving it a try, choose the best version. That's it. That's what revision is all about. Read the text closely, identify a small part, pick a strategy, give it a try, choose the best version, repeat, 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 all the way through your piece until you've met the definition of done. What's nice about this is it's strategic, which means we all have a small toolbox of strategies to apply over and over again. And it's incremental. We do it a little bit at a time. And I think that makes all the difference in the world. Oops, my email address showed up. Let's get that off there. Revision is the key to success. This is me talking. I'm quoting myself here. Revision is the best way to make kids better writers, because revision is how kids make writing better, and better writing is proof that kids are better writers. Now, if that sounds kind of circular, that's exactly the way I intended it. I want you to believe, as I do, because it's true, that revision is the core of learning to write. Revision is the best way to make kids better writers. Spending time in revision is the best way to make kids better writers, because revision is how kids make writing better. Okay? And better writing is proof that kids are better writers. We don't need rubrics. We don't need standards. If we have to use them, fine. But that's not what tells us whether a kid's a better writer or not. It's their work. It's the fact that the last 3 pieces they turn in are better than the first 3. That's something we can see and hold in our hands. Oh my gosh, there's my email address again. Well, it's stevepeha@gmail.com. You can email me anytime anyway. Revision is what we value most. By we, I'm going to extend that to all of us as teachers. I'm going to extend that to all of us as kids. And I'm going to extend it by definition to all of us as readers, because I think readers value the fact that revision has occurred, even if they don't know what revision occurred. So when it comes to writing instruction, revision is what we value most, because we know that revision is the most valuable thing a writer can do to get better. So if our job is to use what precious few moments we have to help kids become better writers, then when it comes to our instruction, revision is what we value most, because learning is what we value most, and revision is the most valuable thing a writer can do to get better. Again, it's sort of a circular logic, almost a Yogi Berra-like logic, but it makes a certain amount of sense to read it over a couple times and think about it. There's my email. Okay, here's the deal. Send me an email anytime. I really do like getting email. For those of you who are in this group at this workshop, 200 of you or so, or however many we had, I did get about 650 emails from you, and that was fantastic. I learned a lot, made my workshop better. I'll know how to do this better the next time, because some of your questions were great. Most of your questions were great, and I got to write back to every one of you and forge a better connection. Many of you have written me back now. So anybody watching this, please go ahead and write me. I'm at stevepeha@gmail.com. So if the most valuable time we can spend with kids is instructing them in revision, the most valuable thing we can give them in revision strategies, the most valuable thing they can do to make their writing better is revise, then why don't we start evaluating what we value? Why don't we start evaluating revision? It's a good predictor of quality, especially if it's normal, it's habitual. Kids use it as an opportunity to make their writing better. And here's my quote about that. Because we value learning, because revision is the most valuable learning experience we can provide to student writers, revision should carry the greatest value in our evaluation of student learning in writing. Notice I didn't say of student writing. We often get pieces of writing, we don't know what was revised. So we still have to look at a piece of writing when it's done in terms of the whole. But in terms of what a kid has learned, it's completely different. In terms of what a kid learns, we should have them in revision half the time, 60% of the time. And what we should be able to say that they learned is the number of things they can do to revise a piece to make it better. That's what learning to write means. It literally means I can revise better now than I did when I started. That's it. Because the reason that's it is because the quality of the piece does not have anything to do with the progress a kid is making, unless we're comparing it to a previous piece. If I get a piece of writing from a kid and it's bad, I don't know, maybe they were worse. If I get a piece of writing and it's great, well, maybe the kid's a much better writer than them. They just knocked it off. If I see either of these kids revise, though, I don't know exactly how good they are at writing. The kid who turns in the bad paper probably won't revise at all. And the kid who turns in the really great paper, if it's truly great for them and they've done a great job, they've actually learned something, I'll see that evidence in revision. I could, in fact, evaluate kids pretty successfully if all I saw was revision, I think. Oh, there's my email address again. I put my email address on my slides in my workshop so that people can be reminded to email me during the presentation. That's the purpose of those. I just forgot to take them off. Sonu, it's one of my favorite, it's one of the only Yiddish expressions that I know really well. So new. This is from Guys and Dolls. That's Frank Sinatra's Nathan Detroit. And he's talking to Adelaide there, who's been giving him a scolding about never showing up in 14 years that they've been engaged to actually take her to get married. And he's sort of saying, well, that's me. I'm afraid to get married. I don't know what to do. I'm in love with you. It's so new. It means about 50 different things, but in this case it means, so what do you want to do about it? This is the way it is. Let's get on with it. So let's get on with it. Here's a wrap-up. Make revision a normal part of writing. Don't make it a special thing. Don't make it a hard thing. Don't say we're not going to revise this time or that time. Just make it a normal part of writing. It'll be easier on everybody. I think it'll make revision normal. Identify more revising opportunities. Show kids that there are specific things that they can revise. Things that come up a lot. Beginnings come up all the time. Every piece needs a beginning, every piece needs an ending. Those are where your opportunities are. Teach step-by-step structured strategies. Kids really do need, at least the first few times they try something, they need a step-by-step structured approach to doing just about anything in school. Why would revision be any different? So teach the revision strategies step by step, sort of the way I just did. I usually use my own models. That's the easiest thing for me to do because it doesn't require any planning. And modeling revision doesn't even require me to write very well. In fact, the worse I write, the better I can model revision. I can also have the kids suggest revisions to me. So to be honest, if you don't feel like you're a good writer or you're somewhat self-conscious about your writing, you are actually the ideal revision teacher. Take an incremental approach. Start on really short pieces. Revise tiny little bits at a time, a sentence, a word, a paragraph. Don't let kids write a whole piece and then tell them it needs to be fixed. Conference with them regularly. Have them share regularly little parts of what they're doing. And take an incremental approach to making them better. Praise the effort before the result. It doesn't mean the result isn't important. It means to let kids know that it's the effort that leads to the result. Remember I said that one of the revisions to my idea of revision that I made was I changed revision takes skill to revision takes effort. And that's what this is about, giving kids praise. We can't always give them praise for their results because their results aren't always good, especially in revision. But I can always give kids praise for effort if I think they're really putting an effort in. And that's really all I ask of kids. Put in an effort. The rest will take care of itself if I'm doing my job. Publish more short pieces. Imagine how much easier it is to do a lot of revision on 250 words, which is what you saw me do, versus 850 words. I can't stress enough that kind of what makes all of this possible is the fact that we're not revising very much and we're finishing a lot. And the best way to do that is to publish really short pieces. There's just not much point in having kids write 1,000 words when a 1,000-word piece is really just 4 250-word pieces or 10 100-word pieces or 2 500-word pieces. It's just nonsense to have kids write 1,000, 2,000 words or to give them minimum 3 pages long. Don't give minimums, give maximums. And don't use pages, use word counts. So I might say maximum on this is 250 words. It's as long as a letter to the editor can be. Might as well teach kids to write short. Everyone who reads them will appreciate it. Place evaluative emphasis on revision. I'm not saying to grade everything on revision or even to grade it all. I'm just saying place evaluative emphasis on revision. Why place evaluative emphasis on revision? Because what we evaluate is supposed to be kids learning, and what they learn is what they learn how to do in revision. That's the most important thing. Hopefully they're using a lot of effort, which you can also evaluate. They're doing things incrementally so we can see them. They know structured approaches to strategies. They can identify more revising opportunities, and they can make revision a normal part of their writing. Gosh, what do you know? These things here and my phone number are just the same things we need kids to learn. So this is what I love about this new approach to revision. Everything in it that I need to learn is exactly what I want the kids to learn. So while I'm teaching, I'm learning. While I'm teaching, they're learning. While they're learning, they're teaching me, and everybody has a good time. It's a virtuous cycle.